Hi, I'm Blaine Rodgers, and I'm here this morning with Kori Soutter, and we're going to discuss some of the things as we come into the summer months, preparing for your shows with the cattle shows, whether it's a county fair all the way up onto a national or state level show. There's lots of things that we can kind of implement right now at this portion here in the spring, and that'll help be more successful going into the summer and preparing to try to meet your goals this summer. So Kori, thanks for joining us.
Thank
Really
you for
excited
having
to
me.
kind of pick your brain a little bit here on some of these things. We've had the opportunity to discuss some of the other species also, and as we kind of start going into some of these topics, I think that the cattle side of the equation maybe is one that becomes a little bit more extensive in terms of how to prepare as we talk about some of the small animals, bringing them home and getting them, started on track for the summer shows. Really the cattle has been an ongoing process that is kind of maybe starting to hit its second phase. And so as we talk about some of those things, and we're transitioning here in the spring when the weather kind of fluctuates and some of those things coming into the summer where we see some higher temperatures. One of the first questions I had for you was just, can you kind of walk us through some of the ideas that you have in terms of keeping the livestock healthy and on feed and pushing forward as you prepare and try to kind of navigate these waters of some of the crazy weather fluctuations we're having?
For sure. So at home, we always incorporate the Short Champ pellet into our feed. We always have a stress tub out in our pen. The big thing that I've noticed even out in our travels is some people are really leery on putting hay out. Our hay tires are always full, kind of helps keep the gut going. Um, I know it's getting the time going into that time as you transition into that cooler period, which could be here for some people in the next month or so. At home, we always just feed our supplements in the morning in the cooler, and then we'll feed the main course of meal at night. And what we find there is they'll hit the feed hard when we let them out of the cooler, and then they'll kind of come back at 3, 4 a.m. and kind of finish it up, and then they'll be ready to go for the next morning. Some people get a little worried about that on acidosis, but we've personally never had a problem. I think some of our show feeds now have so many buffers in them that kind of keeps them going. So personally, on a personal level, we've never had a problem with that. Also, probably eating with a buddy is best. Competition is always good. Anytime you can keep the cattle comfortable, clean the pens, make them feel like they're wanted, they're needed, they need to eat, they need to go on about their daily business. So those are some of just the small tips that we kind of go about.
Sounds good. Obviously, even the best managers and most skilled at taking care of livestock, you can do everything right. You can do things that have worked for you, all the time in the past, and it seems like it's inevitable. You'll just hit glitches every now and then where stock will go off feed or not feel good or whatever. What are some of the tricks that you guys have found if you do hit a period where they go off feed to kind of get them rejuvenated and started back and rolling again?
We'll either hit them with the boost or even the cattle drench to kind of get them back going. Obviously, when they're off feed for quite a period of time, we'll like slow them up back on feed. We won't just like put a full bucket of feed right in front of them. We kind of work them back up if they've been off feed for a while.
Sounds good. One of the things that I know is a really big challenge is trying to prepare and decide how you want to get those animals ready. And we all talk about on the cattle side, probably as much as anything, the emphasis on their hair cycle and getting it in the right position to get them, hairy for the summer shows. Can you walk me through kind of some of the things that you're doing here? Say we're maybe 150 to 120 days out, how you're preparing them. At what point do you really start emphasizing, the difference between getting old hair out and starting that new growth cycle and kind of the timeline on where you might do that? I know everybody's endpoint can be different, whether you're going to a junior nationals this summer or, a later summer state fair or even into the fall majors. Can you kind of just give us from a timeline standpoint so it's universal, across the board, whether, the differences in shows, kind of how you guys like to go about some of that stuff?
Yeah. So consistency, I would say, is always key. There's different techniques that you can get the hair out. You can use it. You can shear them. You can shed them, or basically slick them off. We go off of the Farmer's Almanac. Whatever, there's a good hair day. We like to shear. We 5/8 everything, and then 71/12 their necks off. We go up when we shear. When we 5/8, we'll leave the top hair, the hind quarter, legs, belly. And then some of that hair that we leave, though, we'll like go through with like a shucking comb or a rice root brush just to get the dead out. And until you get the dead out, you're probably not going to grow any new hair. The big key would be to get all of that dead hair out. Typically, we usually put them in the cooler right at the 120-day mark. I know some people vary between 100 and 120, but we kind of think just to get that extra month, 20 days on them, it really does kind of help them. Also, a big thing would just to be to keep that hide healthy. Find something that works in your barn, whether it's, I would be a little careful with some oils to use. Sometimes at night they can get a little heavy, but like a sheen or some sort of a soap or something. We only soap 2 to 3 times a week. But we're rinsing when we're going into the cooler season. We do try to rinse 2 times a day. If you can only rinse 1 time a day, which is totally fine. Everybody's busy. Everybody has their own schedule. We will try to rinse between 15 and 20 minutes just to kind of help lower the body temperature down. I think if you're rinsing just to kind of get them wet, I'm not really sure if you're probably just maybe defeating the purpose. So if you can be in that wash rack for a little longer, that's probably going to help lower the body temperature. What we do like cooler season time is we'll try to put them in like as the sun comes up. We'll not let them out till the sun comes out. Now, like in April, when you get in later April, sometimes the temperature doesn't get above 50. So we'll leave them outside, try to keep them much as natural as they can. Summer days can get long. So the big thing there would be to, when you do put them in at those different hours, what you're doing is you're kind of tricking their schedule. So you're making them think that the days are getting shorter and the winter's coming. So the big thing again would just to be kind of consistent on what you do. Everybody has a different schedule and everybody has different times. So just find something that works for you and kind of stick with it.
Sounds great. I know one of the things that's really challenging is, especially as we talk about the cattle portion and putting such a large emphasis on growing hair and trying to keep them in a cool environment, is balancing letting them be the animal that they are and be comfortable and still trying to grow hair. And so where I'm going with that is, all the other species have the luxury of getting out and exercising and, keeping them in shape, or just from a standpoint of making them feel good, getting some exercise, increasing their metabolism to, keep eating good, or just feel good, get out some fresh air and move around and, help their structure and stay sound. So one of the things that I think that I've seen in talking to people that, obviously if you, in the summer months of raising cattle, how do you balance that? How do you make sure that they get enough exercise yet keep them from being out in the extremely hot temperatures and those kind of things? What are some of the things that your family has found over the years that are effective in terms of letting those animals still be livestock, letting them get some exercise, yet still balancing that with keeping them in a cool environment to promote hair growth?
For sure. So our pens at home in our cooler, we have loose pens, so they're not super big, but they can get up and move around if needed. And then typically in the morning before letting them in, we will exercise them around their pen, their night pen that they're in. Same with before we do our last rinsing at night, we'll go outside and exercise them, bring them back in, rinse them down. And then depending on what the temperature is, if it's hot and humid, like they're in the cooler for a while. I wouldn't recommend keeping them in overnight. We definitely always try to let them out if the temperature is below 75, but if it never reaches that point, we'll try to let them out at midnight and we're up by 5 again, putting them back in, just so they're cattle. They got to be kind of in a natural habitat. They got to get their exercise. So we do exercise in the morning, and then we do exercise before we rinse them at night.
Sounds great. Thanks for the insight on that. What are some of the things, we've talked about with some of the other people that we've discussed some of these topics with, and Maverick and I had a great conversation here about, the evolving practices and the competitive nature of our industry. I think that, even back when I was showing a long time ago, the difference in how many families are educated and how to manage them and the level that they do it at, the competitive side of these shows is kind of mind-boggling, and there's not a lot of separation on that top
For
tier
sure.
from being very high quality to elite enough to win a show. What are some of the things that you guys try to do to prepare yourself? Is there anything that kind of you feel is something that you can separate yourself in terms of putting an animal in the ring, giving that first impression that really, attracts a judge's eye? Or, a lot of times when an animal walks in the ring, how they hit a judge determines whether or not they're winning the show or winning a class or whatever. What are some of the things, both from the showman side of things as well as the livestock preparing them, that you like to do, that maybe you feel gives you a little edge when it comes down to that difference in being good versus great?
For sure. So I guess one thing is never expect to win. Like there could be your neighbors working harder than you, or somebody else could be working harder than you. So definitely like just go out and work hard and be confident in what you do. Feel free to like reach out to one of us or your neighbor or somebody else for questions if you have questions, because there's always mentors out there to help. And there's always people that probably have the same question that you do, but are a little afraid to ask. So one thing though that we do at home is we will never put the cattle in wet in the cooler. We always blow them out dry, or even rice red them dry, just because we feel, and I know people have said this before, if you do put them in wet, that water kind of sits on top and kind of attracts and keeps that heat in. So we'll always blow them out dry or rice red them, depending on what we have time and how the day goes. I don't know if that really separates us apart, but that would be maybe just a key tip to do for the future.
Sounds good. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of things that people have, in their management practices, and there's a lot of elite showmen as well as homes that, all can accomplish succeeding on a high level. And there may be a lot of different ways to accomplish that. So, everyone has their own program, and obviously there's a lot of ways to do that. And I think you brought up a good point, and just being consistent in whatever that approach is, and making sure that you implement a management practice that you can continue on and do the same
Right.
all the time.
I know for like, especially in Iowa now, we have those showdowns. So even like they're great. Even like the level of our county fairs have increased. I know I've talked to some people about this, just because those people that like probably maybe don't go to a junior nationals or don't go to a national show do have that opportunity to go. If they win their county fair, they can go to the showdown for their district, and then they can go to the all Iowa showdown. So I feel like that's kind of helped, drive the younger kids to make that next step.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I've found, especially just after the last years of events with the pandemic and everything, and I think it's really a testament to our industry, that how resilient we can be and adapting to change.
Yeah.
But there's been some really neat things that I've seen happen, and because of the cause and effect, it's kind of got everybody trying to reposition themselves and figure out how to manage new shows and different opportunities. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, as shows started to cancel, there was a lot of people that stepped up to the plate and made new shows and
Put a new one on. Yep.
yeah, and from that standpoint, it's really changed the environment of where we go and what we do. So everyone's kind of on a learning trajectory right now in trying to figure that out. But one of the things that I think has happened is we've increased actually the number of shows that there are, and maybe some different times of years and opportunities. And I've noticed in that, it's kind of thrown a new level of management practices that you've got to figure out, because Um, you know, even as things become back to normal, you know, are some of these new replacement shows going to continue on? Is there, you know, are some of them, the old shows going to come back that maybe didn't happen last year? And so my question with that is, you know, specifically on the cattle side of things, you know, as we talk about some of the small animals that maybe their window of opportunity to show is a little bit more precise, it maybe isn't quite as delicate. But as we talk about cattle that can have more longevity in terms of where they show, or even a heifer that, as we start to, you know, start on these management practices for a specific show that may happen, for example, the 1st of August. Now we see that there's a lot of these shows that go on through later summer months that you can still have the opportunity to go to,
Yep,
or,
yep.
you know, into the fall and winter. Um, what are some of the things, and maybe I'll direct this question a little bit more even to the breeding cattle side. How do you manage those livestock, or what are some keys as you prepare, say, your heifer for junior nationals or the summer state fair? You know, what do you do at that point? It's so hard to maintain that level where they're fresh and they're 12 o'clock. What are some of the things that you think are instrumental if somebody wants to decide to go from the junior national or the state fair on to maybe one of those fall shows or the new shows that have started here and there? You know, what are some of the things that you can do to kind of make an animal go from 12 o'clock back to, you know, maybe off a little ways so you can peak them again for another show?
Right. So what we do is, like, again, we go to our 120-day mark. And for instance, if we were shooting for the state fair, then we would put them in 120 days prior to that. Big thing here, like going into the summer shows and then trying to show again in the fall, is to show in the fall, you have to have those breeding cattle bred. So don't crank that temperature down probably quite as low on that cooler, because you don't obviously want them aborted, and you want them to be able to go into those fall shows. That would be probably my one key tip. What we do is we do that. We get cattle ready for state fair, and then we'll probably get those same cattle ready for the fall. So we'll, you know, ramp them up on feed, get them ready to go for the state fair. And then as soon as they get home, we'll lower that feed level. And right when they get home from the state fair, some of those are kind of ready to get some of that dead hair out, like in September. So we just take a shucking comb or a rice root brush and just try to get that kind of that stalish hair out. Sometimes it'll get a little kinky or curly or whatever. So we'll just get it out. We don't ever like shuck them out completely or shear them. Then the days are in your favor once you get like in October or whatever. So sometimes they will keep their hair, even though they've been in that period for a long time. And sometimes you're just not fortunate and they will shuck. So it basically just kind of depends on what you're working with and the animals. We never put like heifers or anything on like melatonin or anything like that, just because your window's so short for that.
Yeah. Well, sounds great. That's some great advice and appreciate it. Is there anything else that you can think about that we haven't discussed that you think is important to kind of bring up as we look at preparing for these summer shows and trying to stage your animals and from a management standpoint so that you can be successful?
I would say just like make sure your cattle are familiar with eating out of a feed pan or drinking out of a bucket. Obviously there's different factors when you're going to the show. So try those factors out at home first prior to going to a show. And honestly, I know there are some of those summer shows, like I wouldn't be afraid to take them to some show if they've never been to a show before, just so they're not nervous for the next show you go to or your target show or what you're planning on going in the future. So it's definitely helped though. Like we have, obviously in Iowa, we have plenty of shows that we can go to. So we do try to get them out a handful of times before the state fair and before going to the fall. And that's definitely helped with attitude, just eating when you're on the road and all the other factors that play in. So I would definitely try them. Also, there's that big window from when you show in the spring to when you show in this going into like state fair, county fair. So make sure you practice in your showmanship tips too, because some cattle get it and some cattle don't. So more practice is better.
Thanks, Kori. I really appreciate all your advice. I know that it'll be very handy for, you know, a lot of people to access that and learn from the opportunities that you've had going forward. So thanks for joining us, and we appreciate your insight.
Yep, thanks for having me.